Howdy, folks. This is Dr. Matt Grieshop, Director of the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and you're joining us for Organic Chat. So why don't you introduce yourself, Kelly?
I am Kelly O'Neill, and I am the organic farm supervisor here at Cal Poly.
All right, fantastic. And I'm Matt Grieshop, Director of the Grimm Family Center for Organic Production and Research. And today we're just going to have a little chat with Kelly about what he does here and sort of his feelings about organic agriculture. Sure. So maybe to start out with, Kelly, what are three things you think of when you think about organic agriculture?
So I have a kind of a balanced agriculture background, meaning that I've farmed conventionally and have sustainable ag and organic background. So when I think about organic farming, I think about the inputs. So what we are able to use for inputs, the tool bag, as you like to suggest, is that yep. The tool bag that we have it varies and it is limited, but in some ways it allows you to, when you're farming and putting it in practice, to be more thoughtful on how you farm. So conventional agriculture, which is needed, I think with organic farming, you have to have a little bit stronger intentions, how you're planning, your expectations of crops and your cropping system, your yields, what thresholds that you're going to have for bug damage and pest damage, as well as I think of it as it's needed. I know that conventional agriculture is needed for the capacity of how much we can actually produce for people to eat. But the systems that are designed in organic system in agriculture are fantastic, and the energy behind it are really fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of new, interesting, and intelligent people coming up with different approaches, different systems. I went to school 20 odd years ago for it, so the leaders back then in the organic movement, the sustainable ag movement, they're probably a lot dated comparable to what we have now, and especially with the new kind of movement with the regenerative, and looking at ways that we can kind of have our lunch and eat it too with different systems, whether that's we're helping to provide carbon to offset nitrogen for new policies that are coming along. And I think the other thing that I think about organic agriculture is the lack of knowledge in regards to it with the consumer. I think the consumer, and this is something I think me and you've had conversation about. How do we change the minds of the consumer? How do we not change the minds, but give them a better understanding of the nuances in organic agriculture? With people see like especially with cornworm. You open up a ear of corn, and there's a worm inside of it, and people freak out. And it's like, well, you'd be freaked out if you knew how many bugs were landing on this plant continuously and eating this plant continuously. And how do we, as consumers, as producers, as community members, change people's perspective of how food should look, and how and when should we be able to eat these certain foods? I think that our food system it'd be more dynamic if people had, I don't like this, the slow food movement, that's probably outdated right now but that our food is so fast and it's so available, and that doesn't make it good.
Right.
I think it's
quality versus convenience.
Convenience, and I get it. You talk about rising food price, inflation, all these different things, and but I always kind of, at the end of the day, I think about that the most is that producing chard, you're gonna have cucumber beetle damage on it, doesn't make it any less flavorful, doesn't make it any less nutritious. And I'm hoping throughout, as the movement grows and, this industry grows, that you'll see on the shelf that there is a little bit of damage, and we're not just waste. There's so much waste in our food system as it is.
Yeah.
Just because of that, and
Celery harvest is in the Central Coast region was like my first, well, maybe the most poignant sort of vision I had of that. We're going out to a celery harvest, and I don't think this was an organic farm even, but we were literally walking on a foot of celery. So they were harvesting the hearts of the celery and packing it in those little convenient, 6-pack celery cello packs that you buy at Costco or Kroger or wherever.
Yeah.
And but there was, more than a foot of celery just out of the ground on the ground. But then again, from an organic perspective, I was thinking about it as, well, that's probably about as much carbon as goes back into this system.
Yeah, so it's kind of
it was a conventional system too, so they weren't necessarily cover cropping and composting and doing all the things we'd normally hope we were doing in organic production. So it was interesting because my first step was, this is a lot of waste. And then the flip side, I was like, well, no, this is actually feeding the soil.
Sure.
And this is probably one of the biggest sort of influxes of plant detritus, organic matter, what will eventually decompose that this field ever sees. Like broccoli has a lot of residue, but man, it had nothing on what I saw with celery. It was pretty amazing.
I haven't seen that here, but I imagine it's,
and this was a large scale farm. It wasn't, a couple of folks growing on 5 acres.
Sure.
This was a giant 20-acre patch of celery.
Yeah.
That was very well integrated into the sort of national supply chain.
Yeah.
But yeah, that wastage thing I think is a big part of it. And then I really appreciate what you're saying about the quality of food. And I always think about it as like, how do we get a discourse going with consumers and the produce buyers? It's like, how do we actually have a good conversation where we can see each other's perspectives and start to understand that, we're all part of the same system, that, production and sales is, you can't really do one without the other.
Yeah.
And you both have to have a sort of a sustainable piece of the pie, or neither one's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't have,
I'm talking too much.
No. I think it was, we had this conversation a couple months ago in regards to this. And when I was asking you about this, and I think you made a really poignant, point, is that, it's less on the consumer, it is on the buyers of these produce, is that, the buyers are only going to buy what is available.
Right.
And they're only going to have as much of, I don't expect anybody to understand, have a large, agricultural literacy rate, and
ag literacy.
And that they just consume what is provided to them. And obviously we're creatures of habit. So if you're continuously getting, these, beautiful, pink ladies with no scab damage, or, all these different things.
So pink lady apples.
Yeah.
Not celery.
Not celery, no. But you start to realize that, yes, it is, it's not so much on the consumers, is that just as humans, we generally only process the information that we have.
Right.
So, and, I think that a lot of people, like farmers markets are fantastic. I love the community aspect of farmers markets. I love all those kind of, small systems that provide for, and
we sell a lot at farmers markets. That's one of our major outlets for the produce we grow at the Cal Poly Organic Farm.
It is, and I kind of would like to, food's so expensive, and the availability in food deserts and all, I can go on my, food security kind of high horse kind of things, but I'm hoping that, when people kind of, think about conventional and think about organic, is that sometimes that if you choose to eat conventionally, that doesn't mean that your impact is, you're only able to buy what you're available.
Right.
And I think as systems grow, and especially here in California with the restrictions, in which I think are everybody can have their own opinion on that. I think it's it will be favorable, and I'm hoping that producers and buyers can find a price point that can make nutritious, sustainable, regenerative, all these different things that viable, and that we're not pricing ourselves out, and that the people are in food deserts that don't have availability to, fresh produce. So, like, there's great like WIC programs and EBT programs that you can buy. You have farmer market vouchers, but I think in addition to this, like, I kind of rambling on, but like we were just talking about agricultural literacy, and I think that that portion is, I think people should just have a little bit of that in their lives to understand that there are options. There are we're not just taking information that's kind of given to us, we're seeking it out. So,
well, and to expand on something you just said there in terms of the term food desert, or food of the lack of availability of fresh produce to people. I think about this a lot. We're living in the southwestern part of the country, right? And I mean, you came most recently from Oregon, which is a much more temperate climate.
Sure.
I grew up in California, but I came most recently from Michigan, which is an even more temperate part of the world. And I mean, the reality is you're not growing fresh produce in February in either of those places. No. And so ultimately, if we believe that folks in this country should have accessibility to fresh produce, it's got to come from somewhere. And there's a section of the population that seems pretty convinced that we're going to do that with indoor agriculture, and I think there's probably a fit to some extent there. But I'm questioning whether the sort of energy balance of that is going to pay out. It's incredibly energy intensive to grow food that way, which translates to expense, frankly. But I think that's something you touched on there that's really powerful. We want to support local food systems as much as we can, but the reality is, across the country, if we're going to continue to eat fresh produce, we're going to be importing it from outside our local community at some part of the year. Or we don't eat fresh produce and we go back to eating out of root cellars and canned goods and things like that, which 2 generations ago was not a terrifically uncommon thing. But currently, with this access of produce that we have, I mean, there are ways that produce gets to us, and there's trade-offs associated with all of it.
No free lunch.
No free lunch. But yeah. So here, let's get back to some organic questions. So what are a few things that you feel like you've learned since you've started working here at the Cal Poly Organic Farm and really managing operations?
There's been a ton. I was just thinking about this yesterday.
And things that have gone kittywampus sideways, it's totally okay to talk about those.
No, I mean, like you said, I came from Oregon State University, and it's temperate climate. Just our ability to be able to almost grow year round, with cole crops, lettuce, some root vegetables, all those kinds of things. It has accelerated my production knowledge with just in this 8 months. So it just started clicking. Like, okay, in Oregon you got 6 months.
Yeah.
And you got 6 months of just downtime and fixing things. Here, I think
let the winter wheat grow.
Yeah, I think people should really realize how hard producers work here, and not to say that non-row crop folks don't work as hard, but like non-row crops, especially my relationship with Kyle from Braga, is just like how much they turns, and I think soil types are a lot different here. They're heavy. Water, the restrictions, availability, being more intentional about, okay, I can't just rely on, this abundance of rain that we get in the Northwest, and, fertility's been a lot, different here. I think that the major thing was, the learn. I mean, I sound like I'm towing the line, but like the learn by doing model, it really clicks with me. I mean, it is a really fascinating approach to to learning. I mean, really, like, because I was a little bit cautious. I was like, oh man, I'm going to throw people on these different machineries. I'm going to teach these different things. And once I started being like, okay, this model is the model, I'm just going to allow to do it.
Right.
And my hesitation was like, it started to diminish, because it's like, it's inherent in us that we can figure out. I always tell, and it sounds so crazy, but that growing things, hunting, all these things are instinctually kind of set inside of us. Like at a basic level, we understand the biology of plants, and they speak to us. I think we have the capability to look at a plant and learn what it's saying to us, whether it's needs water, needs nutrition, or it's done.
It doesn't want to be eaten by cucumber
beetles.
beetles.
Yeah. Just all these different things, and the observation of learning that, and allowing students to, I mean, I don't know if they like to share in it, but for me, I'm like, oh, hopefully they're sharing in this as much as I'm sharing into it. And so I think like the biggest thing I've learned from being here is like sharing in the experience with the students, like just being like showing somebody how to like operate a tractor, or telling them about nutrition, or, why we do certain things, and, and then hearing them kind of, throw different questions back at me, what they're learning, where it's like, oh yeah, because they might be up to more speed about different, different approaches in their classes, and being like, oh, okay. And just kind of backboarding that sort of, that relationship, being like, okay, they're learning at some level, whether it's, and yeah, just learning the students' lives, and academic lives, and being able to share my knowledge and share in their knowledge, and in their experience. I've learned all these little things about ag down here, whether it's going to Grimway and learning about carrot production that is just wild.
Yeah.
Like doing such a great job.
You can't really do justice to it talking about it. You sort of have to see it.
Yeah, and but I think that the best part of, and the best things that I've learned is like, oh, I do appreciate, at Oregon State, I didn't really get to work with students all that much. And here,
so actually, I've got a follow-up question on that. So we've talked about this before, Kelly, but and one of the things I think that you expressed a lot of interest in this job when you started was the fact that you would get to work with students. So what do you think, why is that? So just in a nutshell for our listeners, why perhaps were you not afforded, the privilege of working with students in a learn by doing on-farm model at Oregon State University versus why, what are sort of the core components that really make that happen here at Cal Poly?
Sure. So, so Oregon State University is, R1 school. And so they do
that means research oriented for the audience.
Yeah. So their main focus is on research, and just the design of the farms there were designs on trials and different grants that were proposed. And just their kind of the makeup of these things was that, they usually had a principal investigator, they had a faculty research assistant, and then either they had student employees, or they had grad students, or they had a doctorate dissertation or a doctorate student coming with, working alongside of them. Is that, my main responsibilities were just prepping and maintaining their, whether it was hazelnuts, whether it was palm or stone fruits, making sure that the crop that they had was to maintain those things. I didn't really have any other interactions other than.
So there's like a division of labor there, is what I'm hearing. You've got, your role is to grow the crop. Their role is to do, well, I'm an entomologist, so I say we do horrible things to plants and insects, but to do the horrible things to the crop to learn more about how to grow it better. And so there's a division there where, the students are not really engaging with the actual production. They're engaging with sort of research questions that touch on production.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's maybe not doesn't involve like spending 8 hours on your hands and knees weeding out a couple of rows of something.
100%, and that's the difference in the design. Here is that we start to finish, plant. So whether that's transplant, prep groundwork to planting, to irrigation, to fertilization, to the nuts, everything.
So the knowledge is the product in this case, and the students are really engaging in the process of producing so that they get the knowledge.
Yeah.
And we may have some research and other things going on,
sure.
but it's important to us that the students really learn how to grow these crops and integrate into this larger food system.
Yeah.
With a farmer's market, but then also, I mentioned the farmer's market, we also sell the bonds. We sell to anyone who will buy our products.
Yeah. Wholesale to the school.
Yeah.
So
and food pantries too.
Yeah.
So what else? At Oregon State, where was the farm in relation to the campus?
So most of the research experimental stations, as they call it, are off campus. So they're probably the two farms that I was working at are about 4 or 5 miles away, from campus. So and there's several. There's the horticulture experimental station and the grains and grass experimental station, and those were further out. But here at Cal Poly, everything is on site, which is, I don't think anybody, whoever's interested in agriculture, just to understand it, if you want to go into ag comm or engineering, to have that availability to come to the farm. And
it's a 5 to 10 minute walk from your classroom to the field. Whereas, in my experience at Michigan State was, even the on-campus farms you were looking at 20 minutes in a car.
Yeah. Yeah. So about 15 minutes. Yeah.
If you're teaching, just kills it. You can't do that. Whereas being able to just walk here and do it is a pretty massive opportunity, and really, in my mind, that's sort of the heart of the learn by doing. Is
it's the showcase.
You got to have land and a place to actually do this stuff and have this sort of living laboratory in the sense of teaching, not necessarily in the sense of research. And
to talk about that, just the amount of classes that are available that come out, whether they're looking at the perennials or etymology class, the soil science, all these different classes that that's another thing that I've learned is just it'd be real detrimental, that availability for students to come out and actually have applied learning, be like, okay, I'm going to go catch bugs. And we're not just going to go out to the forest over there. We're actually going to go catch bugs in an area that's, row crop, or in the perennial area. Or
forage crops, because we have those too.
Yeah,
and you could probably collect chicken lice and lice off swine and dairy cows if you wanted to.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm up for that, but
Or the weed science class coming out and collecting the weeds that most impact row crops, or all the forage crops, all these different systems. It's that's what really sold me on this, and I think that I'm hoping that kind of sells other future students. That's you don't really get that anywhere else. You go Montana State, or you go to these land grant states. Most of that is really, like you say, pushed out to the to the edges, and you don't get that same experience.
Well, and it just has a different purpose. Again, there's that division of labor. There's okay, this is a piece of infrastructure we're maintaining for research purposes.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't, unless you're a student who's engaged in research, that means that you're probably not going to have much experience with it. But well, we've talked quite a bit, and I think, thank you so much for your time, Kelly. It's great to have you as our inaugural member for this organic chat. Keep up the great work.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to Organic Chat. This podcast is recorded on the Cal Poly campus. Production provided by our production engineer, Mary Nascimento.